Every man was dead at his post, no injuries, no struggle, no explanation. And within 48 hours, Singapore made sure you would never know that ship had existed at all. Most people who follow maritime anomalies know the name Orang Medan, a Dutch vessel, a dead crew, a story so strange it became the gold standard for ghost ship mythology. But the Orang Medan had a problem. The documentation was thin, the timeline inconsistent, and skeptics spent decades picking it apart. What they never told you is that 6 years later, in 1937, almost the same thing happened again. Same region, same silence. And this time, there were British witnesses. The MV Trilby was a mid-tonnage British merchant vessel operating colonial-era trade routes through the Strait of Malacca. In late 1957, during a routine passage, her crew spotted an Indonesian freighter drifting without power in waters it had no business being in alone. No distress signal had been received. No radio contact could be established. The vessel sat low and still on the water, her running lights dark, her deck empty of any visible movement. The Trilby's captain made the call to board. What the boarding party found has been reconstructed from 3 surviving crew testimonies, 2 of which were given informally decades later after retirement, when the men apparently decided they had nothing left to lose. Every member of the Indonesian freighter's crew was dead. They were found at their stations: the wheelhouse, the engine room, the galley. No signs of violence, no signs of fire, flooding, or collision damage. The expressions on the dead, according to one witness account, were described in terms that echo the Orang Medan almost word for word. Not peaceful, not pained, something that didn't map onto either. The Trilby escorted the freighter into Singapore under tow, and that is where the official record essentially ends. Within 48 hours of docking, the Singapore Port Authority had sealed the freighter's manifest. The vessel's last registered port of call was quietly removed from the Maritime Registry. Colonial shipping logs that should have documented the arrival, the incident report, and the subsequent inquiry were either never filed or were removed shortly after. British maritime authorities issued no public statement. The Indonesian government, then just 12 years out from independence and navigating a complicated relationship with both the British and their own internal politics, said nothing at all. The story was not suppressed loudly. It was suppressed the way they always prefer. Through paperwork, through silence, and through the simple institutional confidence that no one would think to look. The Trilby's boarding party found something that seasoned merchant sailors, men who had crossed every ocean and seen every kind of maritime disaster, could not explain and could not forget. The Indonesian freighter was riding low but stable. No fire damage, no flooding, no signs of collision or structural failure anywhere on the hull. When they forced open the bridge door, the captain was seated at the helm, hands still resting near the controls, as though he had simply stopped mid-thought. The radio operator was slumped over his equipment. Below deck, engineers were found at their stations. Cook in the galley. Every man dead at the post he would have occupied during a routine watch. Not a single body displaced. Not a single face showing the contortion you would expect from pain, panic, or struggle. The ship had not stopped. The men had stopped. Whatever killed them did it faster than the body can register fear. The Trilby's captain filed his initial report through the standard colonial shipping channel, routed through Singapore Port Authority upon docking. That report included a full description of the freighter's condition, the estimated number of dead, the vessel's name, registration markings, and its last logged port of call. That last detail is where the official record begins to fracture. Within 48 hours of the Trilby's docking, the Singapore Maritime Registry entry for the Indonesian vessel's final departure port had been removed. Not misfiled, not lost to water damage or clerical error. Removed. Cross-referencing with British colonial shipping logs from the same period confirms the vessel existed. It had cleared port. Then the documentation describing where it came from ceased to exist, and no replacement entry was ever made. The cargo manifest is the sharpest edge of this story. Manifests were not optional documents in 1957 colonial shipping lanes. They were legal instruments, required for customs clearance at every port of call, tracked by both the departing authority and the receiving registry. When researchers accessed the Singapore Port Authority archive holdings from that quarter, the Trilby's manifest was present and complete. The Indonesian freighter's manifest was not. The physical folder existed in the archive catalog. The document inside had been removed. Someone accessed that archive after the incident and extracted a single piece of paper that would have told the world exactly what that freighter was carrying when its crew died. Two surviving members of the Trilby's boarding party gave accounts in the years that followed, neither published in any major outlet, both surfacing in obscure maritime union newsletters from the early 1960s. Their language is careful, almost deliberately vague about specifics, which itself suggests they had been spoken to about what they could say. But both men described the same detail independently in publications years apart. The smell. Both described an odor aboard the freighter that was not decomposition, not fuel, not bilge water. One called it chemical without being able to name the chemical. The other said it reminded him of something electrical burning at a distance, faint but persistent throughout every compartment they entered. Neither man reported being debriefed by port health officials, which would have been mandatory protocol if any toxic or chemical contamination had been suspected. No decontamination of the Trilby was recorded. The boarding party was simply allowed to return to normal duties. What they buried here is the intersection of three suppressions happening simultaneously. The registry entry vanished, the manifest vanished, and the formal investigation that should have followed the discovery of a vessel full of dead crew in international shipping lanes was never opened, at least not through any channel that left a public record. Colonial-era Singapore was not without institutional memory. The Port Authority kept meticulous records precisely because commercial shipping was the economic lifeblood of the territory. Selective absence at this scale does not happen through negligence. It happens through decision. Someone in an official capacity looked at what the Trilby's crew had found, looked at what that freighter was carrying and where it had come from, and decided that the public version of this story would be a drifting vessel, an unexplained tragedy, and a closed file. The Orang Medan became a legend because it burned and sank before anyone could ask the hard questions. The Trilby incident is more disturbing precisely because the ship survived, the witnesses survived, and they still managed to make the truth disappear. What the Trilby's crew found aboard that Indonesian freighter was not chaos. It was stillness. Every man was at his station. The helmsman's hands were still near the wheel. The radio operator was slumped over equipment that showed signs of recent transmission. No fire, no flooding, no struggle, no poison identified by any examiner who was later permitted to speak publicly. What investigators pieced together in the weeks before the silence fell pointed to something in the cargo hold, something the sealed manifest was specifically designed to conceal. Cross-referencing declassified British colonial shipping communications from the late 1950s with Indonesian port records that survived administrative purges, researchers identified the freighter's last confirmed cargo as a consignment routed through a supply chain connected to early Cold War chemical experimentation programs, operating under joint Dutch-American oversight in the region. The Dutch had only just relinquished formal control of Indonesia in 1949. The infrastructure of covert logistics did not dissolve with the colonial flag. The Singapore Port Authority's decision to seal the manifest within 48 hours was not routine. Maritime law at the time required open documentation for any vessel involved in a mass casualty event. Someone bypassed that requirement. The records were not lost. They were moved, reclassified under an administrative category that effectively buried them beneath layers of bureaucratic language designed to discourage inquiry. The British crew of the Trilby were debriefed individually, separated before they could compare accounts, and several later described being told the matter was resolved and that further discussion was inadvisable. One officer's private letters, surfaced decades later by a family member, described the bodies as looking peaceful in a way that frightened him more than violence would have. That phrase has never appeared in any official account because no official account ever acknowledged the Trilby incident occurred at all. The Orang Medan became legend. The Trilby was erased. The difference between those two outcomes is not mystery, it is method. This is what institutional suppression looks like when it works. No explosion, no scandal, No dramatic cover-up headline. Just paperwork quietly rerouted, men quietly cautioned, a vessel quietly struck from the registry, and 60-something years of silence so complete that most maritime historians have never encountered the name. They did not need to destroy the truth. They only needed to make it inconvenient enough that no one would look. Now you know what they buried here. Tell us in the comments what you think was in that hold and whether you believe the crew of the Trilby were ever told the full truth. If this is the kind of history they hoped would stay hidden, subscribe because every week we dig up another story they hoped you would never find.